Today, we're going to talk about different pelvic tilts and how it affects your exercise and your movement. Let's go over the basics. Your pelvis can tilt in different directions. The positioning of your pelvis can play a huge role in the way that you do exercises and your risk of injury in certain positions and certain ranges of motion. There are three main categories of pelvic tilts, although I want you to think of it more like a scale. You can be all the way on one end, all the way at the other, or anywhere in between. A natural pelvic tilt is a neutral spine. So essentially, it looks like this. And I have my shirt tucked in so that you can see where my hips are. You'll see that there's a natural little bit of lumbar curve here. It's not too much and it's not too little. This is the position that most exercises should be in. The next pelvic tilt is the anterior pelvic tilt. This is because you're shifting the pelvis so that the bones here, right at the front, are tilting anteriorly to the front. And you'll see that what that does is cause a huge arch in my lower back. We don't want that. I can already feel a lot of pressure in my lower back. It's very uncomfortable and it's causing a little bit of pain as well. If you do exercises too much in the anterior tilt, you risk injury or overactive lower back and less active glutes and ab muscles. We don't want that. Over time, it can result in injury, and what we want is a nice functioning core and glute because that will help you be stronger, and if you're doing any sort of sports or day-to-day activities, it'll help you decrease your risk of injury and improve your performance naturally. Next is the posterior pelvic tilt. That's the third and final tilt that we do with our pelvis, and essentially it looks like this. We're moving from neutral to a posterior tilt where those same bones in the front that were tilting more forward are now rotating and tilting that way. So again, neutral, posterior, neutral, posterior. Now, two things happen naturally when you force this movement. One, I all of a sudden feel my glute muscles engage to pull the pelvis under, and I also feel my abs engage. Now, there are actually some exercises where you want to be in a posterior tilt. Think of a glute bridge or a hip thrust, for example. A glute bridge here will pin the ribs down, and then as we start to squeeze the glutes, you'll see that you can feel your abs pulling in, and you can feel your glutes tilting your pelvis posteriorly. Another way to think of it is pulling your hip into your rib cage, and they meet in the middle. Now I'll show you an example of what you don't want. If you are doing a glute bridge, here's how you would do it with the anterior tilt. You already see that I have a big arch here in the lower back, and if I try and pull up, I can actually feel my lower back working way more, contracting harder than my glutes are. Now that's no good because again, that can lead to an overactive back that may actually cause something like maybe an end plate fracture on your spine or some sort of disc injury as well. So for a glute bridge or a hip thrust, we want to be either in the neutral spine, which is abs braced, and your glutes thrust up, or a posterior tilt, where you start with a flat spine and just coming up like this. Now another example that I want to give you is why you want to be in a neutral spine for a lot of exercises. Take the deadlift, for example. You want to have the abs braced, but loose hips at first. Now say we're doing a Romanian deadlift here. I'm hinging at the hips. I'm in the neutral spine. Now this is what it looks like if I'm in an anterior pelvic tilt. I feel a lot of pressure in the lower back, no good. And this is what it looks like if I'm in a full posterior pelvic tilt. Really not good. This is a super rounded lumbar spine, rounded lower back, and this is the position that you're most susceptible to getting an injury in. Also, that means that you're pulling with your lower back. All I can feel is my lower back here. The second that I move my pelvis to neutral, I can now feel my hamstrings loaded and I'm not even in the fully bottom position. So that's why neutral is usually best for exercises like that. Same thing with the squat. If you're squatting with a super anterior tilt, I feel discomfort in the lower back and I can't actually go that low. I can if I really push my knees forward, but now my heels come off the ground. It's not a very stable base. Now if I squat with a neutral spine, bracing the abs, hinge at the hips and at the knees, you'll notice that I can get a big range of motion and my lumbar spine stays pretty neutral. Now again, another example of a posterior pelvic tilted squat also puts too much pressure on the lower back in a rounded position. See that big rounding right there? That is not what we want. We want the hips and the core, the glutes, the hamstrings, the quads, all working together and loading those muscles. We don't want to be hanging out in our ligaments and in an unsafe spine position in either way.